You're looking at us with the heads.
I know, mate. We're like the people
Every
in
time.
Queen's funeral. Like,
Oh yes, they were
walking.
They were walking.
It was
like
quite
that, yeah.
melodic, mate.
It was actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Straight to the beat.
Welcome back to another episode of Wise Words Book Summaries. Today, as we're changing topic, we're going for habits. So we're going to be reviewing a bunch of different habit books, and we're starting with no other than Atomic Habits by James Clear. I think we actually have done this book before, but now we're doing it with a kind of new mindset,
a new structure.
Yeah. So hopefully.
I've always sort of believed some books obviously you need to reread multiple times, and you always get more from them each time. In my head, at least.
Absolutely.
I don't know about you, but even just coming back to this book after what I think it must have been maybe 2-3 years ago, I read it fully. Yeah. I'd already forgotten some of the main. Well, not forgotten, but I completely forgot the way he worded certain things.
Yeah.
And it's good to be able to read it again. To be honest, I'm looking forward to trying to apply it in my own life.
Yeah. Mate, same. And seeing as we use Notion now, I'm kind of interested to try and apply some of the. I feel like it's completely different when you're reading a book and you're applying it straight away. As opposed to reading it and then down the line you're like, oh, you're trying to remember everything and trying to apply it that way, and it just doesn't work as well. But we're here today to talk you through all of that, give you the actionable ideas so that you can go away and start actually implementing this stuff.
Should we do you want to just take it away with your notes? Because I guess structured these
bad boys.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's start with a definition. So a habit is a routine or behavior that is performed regularly and in many cases automatically. The whole point of this book, the reason why it's atomic, is that it's kind of compounding. It's incremental. It's accumulative. So it's about tiny little actions that build up to something. Rarely are there ever such big things that we do that completely change our behavior. Because think about it, it's like a one-off. If you were, I'm thinking from an evolutionary perspective, if you were to do one amazing thing, or you would suddenly come across loads of food, it might just be a fluke, right? Mm-hmm. And your brain has to kind of not go put all their eggs in one basket and be like, oh, this is always going to happen every time. Yes. I feel so there has to be kind of incremental increase in all of these behaviors to convince your brain a change of behavior.
Yeah.
And so James Clear kind of puts forward this 4-step model where how a habit is created or formed. And so that's cue, craving, response, and reward. And we'll touch on all of these later on in the podcast, but that's just kind of the outline of the book and how it follows.
He also had the above cue and craving. He called it the problem steps, I think. And then he also called the other two bits, the response and the reward, as the solution phase. Yeah. Because a lot, like you were just saying then about, finding food in your environment, and obviously your brain wants to reward you with, how you came about finding the food. But at the same time, it can't just be like you said, you find it once by chance. It can't immediately wire you. So every time, you see something that looks like food, you run after it like a madman.
Yeah.
The point being here, So with the cue and the craving, the whole point there is when you have a problem in your environment, something creates the problem though, the cue. Sorry, Matt, I've actually completely lost my phone.
No, you're right. The first two are basically the problem phase.
Yes.
And the second two are the solution.
Yeah.
And yes, it's interesting actually approaching a habit book now, because we have touched on a lot of this kind of stuff before. So to us, it may seem quite obvious, but actually, if I was looking at this with fresh eyes, I would actually have the mentality with which he wrote it for. So for instance, he talks about how we overestimate the importance of one defining moment. And so we put pressure on ourselves to deliver these big things when actually, like I just said, it's really accumulative. It's really incremental. And the same thing goes, we dismiss and undervalue small changes. You went to the gym once, but you're not seeing the results. And so it's it doesn't really matter if I skip here and there. But once again, it's accumulative. And it's easy to, like, the same thing goes for bad habits. It's easy to rationalize one-offs. It's like, oh, I'm going to have a Coke, I'm going to have a cheat meal today, but it won't really make a difference. But if you do that over and over again, well, it does. And I think that's the kind of audience that he was writing it for, people who haven't really tried to understand habits before or ever implemented them. And it's like, seeing it with a fresh pair of eyes.
Because I was going to say, one of the first thing he makes you do, and I know I'm kind of slightly going away from your notes here, but one of the first exercises he recommends people do is that, the habit scorecard thing, where you write down, the small behaviors you're doing every day, and then you assign next to it, I think it was either a plus, a minus, or an equals. A plus being it's, a positive, like, good habit, a negative being it's a bad habit, and then an equal sign being it's like a neutral. And the whole point was to sort of create yourself a little dashboard where you can see, this is the habits I get into every day. Like, I check my phone, I'm eating, let's just say I'm eating too much sugar or whatever. It's the whole point is to be able to take stock of where you currently stand, right? And that is definitely for somebody who is, I guess, new to the habit space and maybe aren't even aware that, the small decisions or the small things they're doing every day are, like you said, compounding into something bad. Just like, it's the classic. I mean, I'm quite guilty of it as well. Like, being able to rationalize to myself having something sugary, let's just say some chocolate or something.
Oh my God,
almost like every day, right? And and I always say to myself, I'll stop tomorrow. It's fine. I won't do this again. It's just today. And then, if I actually tracked on a scoreboard how many times I've done it, it'd be 4 or 5 times a week, if not more. It's like, well, and every time I tell myself the same thing, which is, I could, I'm not going to do this again. It's just one off, it's a treat. But then it seems like I like to treat myself a lot.
It's same. It's actually, it's just so easy. And until it's like really embedded, you can easily justify it. Absolutely. I was going to say, I think what kind of really got through to me is that just think about, like, habits are literally human behavior that just happen all the time, like, that are regular. It's weird because, like, our whole day we're engaging in loads of different behaviors, and a bunch of them are just ones that we do regularly, but we're not really consciously aware of them because we've done it for so long that we've forgotten that they're even, like, something that we used to never do, and now we do all the time, and it's just part of our daily routine. I think that's kind of a good way to look at it, in the sense that it is just a human behavior that we regularly do, and until we pay conscious awareness to it, we're just
like even biting your nails. I bite my nails quite a lot. Picking up your phone. I was actually reading the book yesterday, and I had my phone, like, face down like that. And I put my hand on it, and once my mind wandered off, I then found myself on my phone. I'm like, wow, it's like my mind just suddenly, something within me without conscious awareness decided, when I wasn't thinking of anything else, to pick up my phone and just be on it, if that makes sense. And that's like an exact example of it, where it's, I don't really have conscious control of that. My body is already doing stuff which I haven't told it to do, because it's, learned to do this when I feel a specific way. I've got a few notes here as well, back on some of his quotes, because James Clear is definitely one of the best writers in my head, who has, like, lots of quite, like, quips. He has, like, lots of short sentence stuff. So he's got here, like, habits are mental shortcuts learned from experience. I like that, because obviously that's essentially what it is. It's a mental shortcut. It's like, I was sat there, I guess the shortcut is I'm bored, hands on phone, my brain then goes, okay, let's try and move away from being bored, pick up phone, now I'm not bored. I'm doing something, if that makes sense. And it's like filling a gap. It's like the shortcut could be said to be like feeling of boredom equals pick up phone and be less bored, or be it's the dopamine, isn't it? Get my dopamine hit.
It is.
And he's got another one here which I liked as well, is all behavior is driven by the desire to solve a problem. And I thought that's quite interesting as well, because if you think about it, like what I'm saying there, the problem state, so to speak, is boredom. Like, the cue for the habit is like I'm bored, or I find myself a lot of the time as well, I don't know about you, but if there's something that's like mentally taxing, if I'm thinking about something and it's like there's like a gap, I have to really focus to get over that gap, I often just grab my phone. Because there's like a difficulty with it, and it's like, how do I solve this difficulty? Either I can pay attention, which is expensive, or I can just pick up my phone and distract myself.
And I think that kind of ties in with, weirdly, like all the influence techniques and things like that. It's like our brain doesn't want to have to give more energy than it needs. So a lot of the time we take the easy option. We want the least taxing option energy wise. And so, we could try and overcome this friction. But a lot of the time, if we have, the alternative, like the easy option, like our phone right there, then most of the time we're going to take it. And this whole book kind of talks about how to get over that, whether that's designing your environment, and we'll go into all these things later on, but it is very much about trying to reduce that friction and make habits as easy, attractive, all those kinds of things. And like, I think something that we kind of resonated with, because I think at one point we implemented it on our website, was this idea that 1% better every day equals 37%, 30 times better by the end of the year. And the same goes for good and bad decisions. So if you can get 1% better at something you're doing every day, then by the end of the year, you'll be 37 times better, which is a huge improvement. Realistically, we're talking 1%. We're not talking like 50%.
Yeah, there's nothing dramatic that's happening here.
Exactly. Nothing dramatic. And that's the whole thing. Once again, it's like, there aren't these big steps that you have to do. They're really small. You just have to do them regularly. And you'll start to see the benefits or the consequences, if the same thing goes with bad decisions, like I said. And I think like another... So you about to say that?
No. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the stuff. Obviously, you're talking about the 1% better and the bit above it. We've already talked about this, but I feel like there is like a massive cultural divide towards the importance of like certain moments. You've got here like something about we overestimate the importance of one defining moment. Because I was literally reading another book at the moment where we have this thing called proportionality bias, where we believe the inputs must equal the outputs or something. So like if you see a massive dramatic change, you must think there was a massive dramatic moment when something happened. But it actually is the small boring shit which ends up creating the biggest change. And that's,
absolutely. Like we see this on Instagram, don't we? It's like everyone shows the results, right? And it's like, oh wow, they've come out of nowhere. They've done so well, but actually you didn't see all of the things that they did to lead. It's that iceberg
metaphor. I don't know if you've ever seen this picture of those icebergs where it's like, the picture of the successful person, and below it's got like the hard work and all the sort of setbacks and whatever. But
absolutely. And I think to build on that, another point he mentions is that your outcomes are a lagging measure of your habits. So for instance, your net worth is your financial habits. Well, your weight or your physicality is your eating habits, right?
Well, of course, it's like the position you're in now is developed from the positions you have been in the past times the length of time, right? If that makes sense. Like every single day adds up, and the position you're in right now is just the accumulation of the decisions you've taken over the last, I don't know. It depends, obviously, what we're talking about here. I mean, if it's health, I think, or even wealth, I guess stuff doesn't happen overnight. So we're talking over like months, if not years time frame. But the position you're in now is essentially, like you're saying, the result of the past actions you've taken, and therefore it is always a lagging indicator or a lagging effect from the input you've put in, right? Because I remember there was a really interesting or really cool book on business, and it was all talking about a lot of businesses just look for they just measure lagging indicators. So what you're saying there, so for example, like revenue, not leading indicators. And that's basically what habits are. It's like lagging is the result. Leading is like what actually causes the result. So lagging would be, in a business context, more money in revenue, higher revenue. But the leading measures would be, hiring sales staff, doing more sales calls, etc. Right. And it's the same sort of habits. Like, I guess at the end of the day, the lagging measure, would be your net worth. Or your savings account, and the leading measures would be depositing 200 quid into your savings account each month, investing the money into certain things, like
the difference between like the results and the process, right? In a sense. Absolutely. And it's funny, like he mentions a point here that's like time magnifies the output of habits, which is, once again, it's like, it's like wine, isn't it? It's like the longer it goes, the better it becomes, in a sense. I'm not sure whether that's the best example to use, but the fact is
good habits,
it's like if you went to the gym 5 times compared to 500 times, well, that time that you've invested is the output is going to be so much better for the 500 times.
Of course. I guess it's interesting to really think of, if you look at everybody's positions and like where everybody stands, like their health, their wealth, whatever, like you just said, it's always a factor of what they've basically been doing repeatedly for the last, I mean, obviously over a lifetime, stuff accumulates, but like it is literally that, like you are the sum of everything you've ever done, right? So therefore the habits are the things that are the most important to your life, right? Like you can, it's funny, it's like stressing about the little things because the little things matter over time.
Absolutely.
Do you get what I mean? Like all these small things, that decision to, you take a salad instead of, I don't know, having some chocolate, right? That small decision, if you do that 50 times a year, you've 50 times improvement in the amount of veg you've eaten, which I'm sure everybody's be better off for that decision.
Absolutely. Like there is a consequence to every action, right? Or there is an output to every action. Our life is made up of millions of actions. It's just some of those actions are on a regular basis, and that's what we call habits, right? So if you literally were to add up the things that, the actions that you do that have a benefit, well, then it makes sense that they'll compound to be beneficial, right? And so that's basically what you're trying to do. You're trying to design your behavior on a day-to-day basis whereby you have good output, that you're doing the good actions rather than the bad ones, or you're not doing the bad ones as often. And that's kind of the whole point. And you want to be able to do that. And the whole point of making a habit is so that you can automate a behavior, because a habit you don't really think about, right? You've done it so many times that you're not even aware that you're picking up your phone, like you were saying. So you basically want to get all the good ones, automate it. And then because you don't have to think about it, you're not giving up as much mental energy. So then you can focus that on things that you actually want to, or get in more good actions. Or improve them.
I'm becoming more convinced as we get older that you do need a steady base of like habits that you do every day, because otherwise the cognitive load, you just get so tired. I find myself, if I try and do too many new things a day, I can't. There's just too much information. If that makes sense. You spend too much time trying to think. If that makes sense. That classic, like when you have to make a decision, it takes a lot of energy. So you need in your life like a bunch of things you can just do, like rote, I don't know if rote's the right word, but just without thinking about it, right? Because then it allows you to have some spare space to work on things that you don't have as habits, right? I guess more creative things that you haven't done before, right? Because I guess everybody has stuff in their life that's new and like you haven't faced before. But because I can imagine if you didn't have habits, it would just be overwhelming. You'd be so tired all the time. Because I find days, at least, I don't know about you, but if I'm making a lot of decisions, I'm so tired by the end of the day. I'm exhausted, and then I also resolve then into bad habits, such as chocolate.
Absolutely,
I will make these, and that's the willpower thing, isn't it? But maybe I don't know if willpower is the right word. It's like you just low energy, and when you're low energy, you go back to trying to feel good, because you're trying to change a state from low energy to high energy. And how do you do that? Using like the pleasure of chocolate, or I guess, or sugar, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. Because if you I'll draw parallels with like Jordan Peterson. His whole point is that you need some structure, you need some some order, right? Because if everything is chaos, then your brain is constantly trying to take
structure
all this
is
chaos.
Like freedom,
your brain's trying to predict everything and live and survive, and so it's trying to be like, oh god, this is new. What should I do? Blah blah, which requires more energy. No wonder you're going to be exhausted by the end of the day if you've been thrown so many things at you. You want a bit of stability, and that's why I think like one of his, I can't remember if it's like a rule or one of the points that he said in his first book was you need to have like a routine. If you're going to start introducing things on a daily basis, like new things, then you need to be able to have some structure to apply it to. Otherwise it's just like, well, you've now got 30 new things, you know? I think
another example as well for that, not exactly the same thing, but it's also when you go about trying to create habits, you can't do like 5 or 6. I've made this error so many times. Every time I've looked at my habits, I've always made about 5 or 6 habits that I really want to start, and then I try and start doing all of them, and I just can't. Because to do all of them requires 6 lots of effort. Let's just say there's 6 of them, like 6 different lots of capacity to try and do something new. And I'm convinced there has to be a point of you start one at a time and you slowly move into these habits. Like you can't just do, I'm going to do, eat healthy, save money. It's just unfeasible. You have to sort of work at one and then sort of chip away.
I 100% agree. And I think that's actually a good segue into his next point, because he was talking about this thing called the valley of disappointment. and how progress is not linear, right? So it's not just constantly increasing. There's normally this valley of disappointment before you overcome like the biggest kind of hurdle, and that's where you start getting most of your results. And like for habits, like habits must persist beyond this point to be successful. And I think if you're doing so many habits all at once, and then let's say you're starting to reach that valley and you're becoming a bit disheartened, well, it's probably better to only have one that's disheartening you until you get over that hurdle, rather than 6 different ones where you're like, fucking hell, I'm trying, so and nothing's working. Yeah.
You know? You're 6 lots of disappointment, not just
exactly. You're accumulating disappointment.
No, but I that's a good point, because and it also kind of leads into the stuff we'll talk about later about identity, and obviously how identity is essentially like your identity is forged by the repeated things you do and your relationship to those things. Like, you know, if you come to believe who you are by the behaviors you take yourself, right? If that makes sense. So I don't. Is it a logical next step to move into that, or is there something else you wanted to add? Because I see you got some stuff here about the goals and systems.
I've got a few things. Like, I think that it is good to distinguish the difference between goals and systems. Like you kind of touched on it earlier on. So the difference between goals and systems, well, basically he starts by outlining the problems with being so goal oriented. So I think he lays out like 4 problems. So if successful and successful people share the same goal, then the goal cannot be what differentiates the winners from the losers, which makes a lot of sense.
Which makes sense.
To be successful, but
everybody wants the same thing, right? Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah,
absolutely. And the second one is achieving a goal is only a momentary change. To change for good, you need to change the system. Deal with the cause, not the symptom. And that, I think, is something that is really important. And you see it throughout society. It's like we never deal with the actual problem at hand. We just put a plaster on top and pretend like it's not there. And then it pokes its head and we put a plaster on that, right? We never actually deal with the root cause, which is normally the system. And this is like the types of systems being like the types of behaviors that you do every day. And then the third one is goals restrict your happiness. So the mentality is that you can only be happy if you achieve your goal, but that doesn't work, because then, you know, you only achieve your goal momentarily now and then. So what happens in between that? You're supposed to be, you know, unhappy that whole time. It doesn't work. Yes. So, and then the fourth one is goals are at odds with long-term progress. When all your hard work is focused on a particular goal, what is left to push you forward after you achieve it? And I think that's a good thing to mention as well, just because you need to have a higher goal that is not even a goal, but like an ideal, right? And we touch on this later on with an identity, or like you want to be your best self, because you can never complete it, right?
Yeah.
There are multiple different goals along the way, but you can never complete it, because if you complete it, well, then what do you change to?
And what's next, you know? Right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think like one of his most famous quotes kind of on this is that you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And I've seen that everywhere with like productivity, like Instagrams and things like that. It's just it's so common.
But it's very insightful in my head, at least.
Absolutely.
What you said there, it's you know, if everybody rise to the level of their goals, everybody billionaires with 6-pack abs, but you know, we'll not. So we all fall to the level of the, you know, the processes and habits we do every day, right? Because if you think about it, that's like we just said earlier, you know, the state you currently are in financially, you know, health wise as well, is based upon all the, you know, the recurrent actions you've taken / habits, or however you want to call it. For the last, you know, for your lifetime, essentially. The point you are right now is a sum accumulation of all of your life experiences in regards to all these different areas of your life. And if some people are more successful than others, that's because they have a different way of acting, you know?
Absolutely.
It's literally, they've taken different actions to you. Don't get me wrong, some of them might have had different circumstances. So, you know, there's always that argument for like genetics, in terms of some people just, you know, put on weight a lot easier than others. And that's, you know, there's no doubting that people have different circumstances that have caused them to get to the positions they're in, but it still doesn't mean that you can't take steps towards being your better self or achieving these goals by setting in systems that help you get there, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to get really like successfully wealthy, that is, unless you save money.
Yeah.
Like, the whole point of wealth is money you don't spend. I thought that's another book quote I remember. Or was it wealth is what you don't spend? And I thought that's quite insightful too. Because wealth is what you don't spend. It's what's in your savings account. Like, what you have is what you don't spend.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Of course it makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's interesting. No, absolutely. So yeah, then did you want to go into the identity aspect?
Yeah, it's only because, so what have we got here? So we got changing our habits is challenging for two reasons. We tried to change the wrong thing, goals, which is what we just talked about. And then we tried to change our habits in the wrong way, systems. You got the 3 layers of behavior change. So the first layer is changing your outcomes, goals, results. The second layer is changing your process, systems. And then the third layer is changing your identity, beliefs, worldview, self-image, and judgments. What note did I get? I got a really interesting note here, and I don't know if you've picked up on it as well, when he went into the etymology of the word identity. So the origins of the word. So identity essentially revolves from identitum, whatever that is. I think that might mean beingness. But anyway, the rough translation, or the origin of the word, was repeated beingness. So the whole idea is that your identity is what you repeatedly do. And therefore, habits aren't just, obviously there are ways you act, but it actually becomes who you are. And that's the deepest level of personal change, I guess, or personal identity. Like, when you change your identity, that's like you can't go deeper than that. You can't go deeper than who you think you are, and that's the way you act.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's we are an amalgamation of all of our actions, and realistically our beliefs kind of follow our actions, right? Like, we've just been talking about loads of cognitive dissonance, and most of the time when we act in a certain way, our beliefs change to fit with our actions, right? And so what is our identity if not our actions, in that sense? So what you just said, like, doing an action repeatedly, well, that builds up into our kind of identity, and how we see ourselves, because it's proof, right? It's proof of what we've done, and then who we are, in that sense.
I mean, I'm just trying to find like an analogy which would really like hit home. I guess unless you played soccer for a professional team, you'll be like deluded to call yourself a professional soccer player. You kind of get what I mean? Like, you have to have the evidence in your life that you've done something to justify to yourself that you're that type of person. So like, you can't be like, oh yeah, I'm a vegetarian, and you've never eaten a vegetable in your life. You have to be somebody who eats lots of vegetables, and obviously sticks to eating lots of vegetables, right? You'd almost be literally crazy if you didn't build up your identity this way. I mean, there's I guess that is part of what being somebody who is crazy actually is somebody who can't see the world for what it is, right? If that makes sense. So you create fictional realities that don't exist. So obviously it makes sense that you would be wired to, develop your own sense of self through the actions you take. It just makes sense, right?
But actually on that note though, it's interesting because he does mention that, like, I've got this note here, that to build identity-based habits, we must first understand who we are and then focus on who we wish to become. So an example would be like a person trying to quit smoking. Now, one person might go, no thanks, I'm trying to quit. So, which means that person still believes they are a smoker. Or there's a person who says, no thanks, I'm not a smoker. And this signals a shift in identity. And what I found quite interesting is, like, it's technically the same thing. It's just change how you perceive yourself. Right?
It's a mindset shift, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I have been toying with that. Like, there is a level of, like, if you made enough affirmations to yourself and you really try to believe that you are this person, I don't know. I guess what would be a strong example? I guess going vegan or something. Like, I am a vegan. Like, if you identify with it, it's a lot. At least in my head, when I like mentally rehearse how I behave if somebody offered me meat, and I train myself to think I am a vegan, I always find it very easy to be able to say it. Does that make sense? Like, it's almost like brainwashing yourself, and it's a lot easier to answer like that than it is to be like, I like to sometimes be vegan. Yeah, do you get what I mean? I guess it's that classic, like, the decision is already made, like, kind of thing. It's, if that makes sense, it's like there is no off or on. It's just off. It's like, I'm not eating meat. It's done. Yeah. Like, I'm not smoking. It's done. Like, instead of being like, sometimes, or like whatever, you kind of give yourself that like level of I don't know what's the word, you give yourself a level of like ability to sliver out with your rationalizations, whereas that I'm not a smoker is like, you can't really.
It's full stop.
And also, it's a public commitment. If you think about it,
absolutely,
book, it's I've committed in front of you to say I'm not this person anymore. Therefore, if I now behave in this way, you're going to look at me and be like, "Oh, well, you don't keep to your word."
Yeah. It's interesting though, because I wonder if like you apply that to someone who's got a bit of an imposter syndrome, right? So I guess we interpret our actions, and then those interpretations build our beliefs, right? So I know I've done this action over this many times, and so I'm that kind of person, right? But technically someone who's got imposter syndrome would be like, I've done this action over this many times and I'm still not sure whether I am that person, right? I feel like an imposter. Yes. And it is interesting just how like our beliefs will change how we perceive ourselves, even if, because I was saying before that our actions are proof, but in a way our interpretations of our actions kind of guide it as well. In that sense.
No, of course. I guess the imposter stuff as well, like the mindset shift you probably have to have is everybody always feels like an imposter at all times, because there's always like things outside of what you can know. If you know what I mean, even if you're a top entrepreneur, there's still things you can learn. Even if you're successful, whatever you are, there's always going to be more things. If you get what I mean, like you can never truly be. And I guess also the reason why people feel like imposters is because we have these like concepts in our mind of entrepreneur or actor, but these concepts are vague. Like there's no real clear way for it,
absolutely.
And that's why you feel like people feel like imposters, because like they're asking themselves the question like, am I being a good actor now, or am I being an actor, or am I being a good entrepreneur? Exactly. Then there's more to it, and it depends on the situation. So it's one of those false, like there isn't really a perfect way to be, even as a human being, right? Half the reason we create moral codes and laws is to try and create an agreement for how we should act. But the reality is this: you can actually technically act any way you want. It's just there's going to be repercussions for it. It's
that's a true point.
I got, what notes did I get down as well? I got something down which is like just a 2-step process, which makes it sound really easy, which is decide the type of person you want to be and then prove it yourself with small wins. I mean, obviously that makes it sound a lot easier, but it literally is as easy as that. As a simplification of what you need to do, it's figure out who you want to be and then take steps and prove to yourself that you can be this person by doing small steps towards it. It really is that simple,
because it's hard to change your habits if your underlying beliefs don't actually match it. Like the ultimate form of intrinsic motivation is when a habit becomes part of your identity. And he had a good point where he said the more pride you have in a particular aspect of your identity, the more you will fight and be motivated to maintain the habit associated. And I think maintain is interesting because originally, we might start taking on a habit and we desire having that habit. But then once we have it, we maintain it if it's part of our identity. So it's not so much like a forward motion anymore. It's like to defend it. And I think that's really like, that's the kind of level you want to get your habit at. Like it's automated half the time, most of the time. And then when someone challenges it, it's like, no, this is like stable. This is secure. This is properly embedded and it's part of me. I think that's the kind of best kind of goal you're looking for in terms of habits.
I think interestingly enough, one of the reasons why maybe I personally have not managed to live up to some of the habits I've wanted to is because I actually didn't start from this identity based part, because I feel like I missed it. I missed like the trick here, because the whole point of like introducing this here is to kind of say to you that this is kind of like the thing you need to reverse engineer from. Do you kind of get what I mean? You need to start with the identity. You need to start with the identity and then reverse engineer the systems to create that identity, if that makes sense. Whereas beforehand, it was definitely more goal orientated. It's more like, what's my goal here? And then create systems around it. But the fact is, I'm missing that third layer, which is the most important in my head now. And I can see why it is, because I can see that, I guess, for example, we don't find it hard to pick up a book and read, because I guess we both now identify as readers, right? And that's how I've managed to sell it to myself this time. I'm like, wow, because there is something about that when you believe you are this thing, and you've given yourself enough, data points or evidence, because I've read enough books to realize I am a reader, right? Like I don't find it hard. And it's the same. I've always also identified as a gamer as well. And that's why I feel like sometimes I can easily rationalize playing video games. It is part of my identity, so to speak. But it's just, it's why I'm quite excited for this Notion stuff as well. I don't know how you've been building it, but I've got, straight away with a new habit, I've got right next to it, like, what identity am I trying to build with this habit?
Yeah.
Just to remind me what I'm trying to do with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because you've got to keep your eyes, I guess, in a sense, that's what the motivation is at the beginning. Like, the motivation is, I'm going to become this person, therefore I need to stick to it. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think funnily enough, the first time I read this book, the biggest thing I got from it was actually this process and product, or the system and goal. The idea that, like, you have a goal that motivates you, but then you've got to put your head down and get to the system, get to the process, right? And then now and then, when your like motivation is dwindling, you look back up and you see that goal, right? And then you get back on with the process. And I think that is like crucial. But it's interesting because, like, I really agree with this, and I think this time, now that I'm reading this book, character and identity is like key to it. I'm kind of viewing it with that kind of lens. But in addition to like deciding the type of, like, the way to do it is deciding the type of person you want to be and then prove it yourself with small wins, like you said. I thought you could also do it with work from your goals backwards to the type of person who would achieve them. So
yes, no, that's a good,
because if your goals are in, like, you do want that goal, right? Mm-hmm. Then it's like, well, what kind of person gets that goal? And I think he had like a good, so after deciding what type of person you want to be, produce the goals that are in line with it. So who is the type of person who could write this book?
Yes. No, I've got the same notes as you here. I've got like, who is the type of person who could, and I've got a bracket saying get the outcome you want, or like run a business, write a book, run a startup. Who's the type of person who could lose 40 pounds, right?
Yeah.
And I guess it's funny though, because all of them revolve around, in my head, if you really go down to it, the same sort of similar characteristics, like determined, reliable, so to speak.
Character qualities, isn't it?
But they always boil down to the very similar ones, if that makes sense. Across all of them, like if I look at the ones I've just said to you, right? So I've got run a business, write a book, run a successful startup, which is the same as run a business, lose 40 pounds. They're all like, doers, like get started, be reliable, be consistent, or they all revolve around the same things. But
I guess it depends what your goals are. Like if they are tangible things like building a business, and yes, if it was like get closer to my siblings or something like that, then it would probably change to more like empathic kind of qualities. But I do agree. And I think once again, it's like they are foundational, right? Like they are the foundation with which you build on top of. And I thought he had a really good point in this, is that if you're going around and you have this ideal type of person you want to be, then use a question to prime yourself on whether you can judge a behavior is good or bad. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if I want to be a healthy person and I'm about to engage in a certain activity, then I could be like, what would a healthy person do in this scenario? And it's kind of one of those actionable ideas that like you can implement, and it's very easy to do. And it probably just does remind you, like, oh, okay, actually, realistically, this person wouldn't do this, which I thought was really helpful.
I've seen different versions of that as well before, for like using your like people you look up to, like role models. So being like, what would, like, let's just say, what would Steve Jobs do? I don't know. And it's, what would this person do? Somebody you have a image in your head of the ideal you want to be, right? I mean, a lot of people actually kind of probably do it with their families. If they look up to their parents and be like, what would my dad do in this situation? If you admire somebody for a specific quality, like what would they do? And it helps you think about, what would they do? But I guess it works best when the person you're thinking of has a specific quality that you want to emulate. Maybe, if that makes sense.
No, I agree.
If you have like a really creative friend, you'd be like, oh, what would this person do? And then it would, trigger those sort of associations.
Absolutely. I just wanted to end this bit, I think, with this metaphor, and I think you used to say this quite a lot as well, that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. No single instance will transform your beliefs, but as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your new identity.
It's funny because I've literally highlighted that. I was going to go say that in a second.
Yeah.
Because it is true, and I quite liked he gave an idea as well of habits as a suggestion. He said like, every habit is like a suggestion of, hey, maybe this is who I am. and I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah,
it's like another metaphor, isn't it, to use? Like it's every time you do something, it's like a little whisper in your ear, like, okay, maybe I am this person who does this. And obviously, once you do it like 50 times, it's like, yeah, we're the fucking G's. Like,
exactly. Yeah. I'm not like originally when we started doing a perfect example would be us doing a podcast. When we first started doing it, I was like, oh, this is a bit strange. We've never done this before. I don't feel like a podcaster, but the more I do it, the more I start to like feel, okay, well, I've done it quite a lot now, and I can kind of like, I don't think I'm like a proper podcaster, but I'm getting closer. If you get
of course. Yeah, no, 100%. I feel like, I don't know about you, but the maybe confidence in doing it has definitely gone up, just because the more you do it, you realize it's essentially just having a conversation that's recorded. But I like you say, the more you do it, and I still, like, I guess what you're saying there as well is there's still always this imposter syndrome, but I don't think that ever goes away, because what is a podcaster, right? Like it's not a very clear defined concept.
Exactly. Once again, it's not just Joe Rogan.
yeah, man. There's also a variety of podcast topics and stuff. And the podcast we run, for example, requires less questioning. Do you get what I mean? Like, most podcasts tend to be more like interview style, whereas ours is more like discussion. Discussion. I was going to say debate, but it's never a debate. It's just us both putting our ideas out there and seeing where it leads us. So
exactly. That's all I got for that bit. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm just having a little look here if I've got any more quotes. I got, every choice is a decision to reinforce your identity, but it's just another way of saying everything we've just said.
Yeah.
I like this one as well. Habits are not about having something; they are about becoming someone. I quite like that quote a lot.
I like that.
I think because it just obviously links in all with this identity stuff, and I've made a big note on the identity stuff. Right. What is next?
So I think before we go into the core of the book, I think we just need to cover what the cue, craving, response, and reward is. So a cue, I'm just going to read these notes here. So our prehistoric ancestors were paying attention to cues that signaled the location of primary rewards that could increase the chance of survival, such as food, water, sex, etc. Now, today, we focus on secondary rewards like money, fame, power, status, praise, approval, love, friendship, all those kinds of things. But it must be noted that those are kind of indirectly improve primary motives. Like, they're still primary motives that have just manifested in a different way, in a more modern way. Craving is about wanting. Your mind looks for cues in your internal and external environment that are linked to these rewards, which naturally create the craving. So with no craving, there's no reason to act at the end of the day, really. What you crave is not the habit itself, but the change in state it delivers. And I think that's quite an important thing. It's like, realistically, we're driven by emotions most of the time. What makes us change our behavior is the fact that, Jess, you're bored, and so you pick up your phone.
Yeah,
right?
No, exactly. Yeah.
So it's like we're constantly dictated. Like, our behavior is dictated by that.
But I was going to say a lot of that craving as well can be a craving to change state.
Yes.
So, like, the boredom is a state, but like there's other states, isn't there? Like, I guess a lot of them are linked to boredom in a sense, because you could a lot of uncomfortableness, I guess, is the best way of putting it. I agree. The cue is the feeling of uncomfortableness. So a cue can almost not only be something in the environment, it could be the way you feel as well.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, like, think about it, that we constantly want to be comfortable because we want to survive and everything like that. But actually, we know that resilience is good for us. A bit of stress is good for us, but our brain doesn't technically want that. But technically, we're built so that when we do engage with a bit of stress, it improves us. So it's like it makes sense why boredom discomfort would be something that keeps.
Will be a cause for us to take action, right? It's a thing that we want to move away from, because it consistently makes sure we actually keep moving, keep doing stuff.
Yeah,
absolutely. If you think about it, otherwise you live a very idle life, I guess.
Yeah. And then I was going to say, last bit was, cues are meaningless until they are interpreted. The thoughts, feelings, and emotions of the observer are what transform a cue into a craving. The same cue can be interpreted differently depending on the person. So, for instance, a cigarette to a smoker or a non-smoker. And it's kind of what we were talking about earlier on, I think, with like interpreting our actions and how, someone can think that, they are a podcaster and someone can think that they're an imposter, right?
Yeah.
So like how we interpret things changes how we perceive them. Quickly jumping on to response, which is obtaining it. So the response, whether that's a thought or an action, is the actual habit you perform. This depends on how motivated you are, how much friction there is associated, and your ability to perform it. So, if you wanted to jump 3 meters, you probably couldn't, right? Like, because you don't have the ability to do it. So, you've got to be realistic. And then last one, reward, which is satisfying and teaching. So rewards are the end goal of every habit. So those are the cue, craving, response, and reward. And his whole book is kind of based around that, basically by having these 4 laws. So that correspond to each one. So the first law is for cue, which is make it obvious. The second law for craving is make it attractive. The third law for response is make it easy. And the fourth law for reward is make it satisfying. And I think it's worth saying that there's an inversion. So when you want to get rid of a bad habit, the inversion to these is for cue, it's make it visible. For craving, it's make it unattractive. And for response, it's make it difficult. And for reward, it's make it unsatisfying.
Yeah.
Whoo. Okay. There we go. All right. That's out the way.
Mic drop.
Yeah. Bam. Yes. Now we can get into the crux of the book.
Cool. I think we're going to have time for maybe 1 or 2, and then we're going to have to do part 2. I think.
Yeah, that's fine.
But it's all good.
Yeah, sure.
All good. So let's just jump in with the law 1 then. So make it obvious. You don't need to be aware of the cue for a habit to begin. You can notice an opportunity and take action without dedicating conscious attention to it. I guess, how would you interpret that? I'm just trying to think. You can notice an opportunity and take action without dedicating conscious attention. I guess this is almost similar to the point I was making at the beginning with my phone.
Yeah.
Where it's like the cue went below my own awareness, if that makes sense. And the next thing you know, I'm already got my phone in my hand. So like I am not consciously aware, let's just say, when I'm walking around my house and I'm bored and I pick out my phone, that's not really a level of like, there's no awareness there until it's too late.
Yeah.
If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, the same thing is like I'll be watching a film and then I'll be biting my nails when I'm like, when it's getting to a good part. So I think it can like go underneath the radar in that sense.
That's it. Yeah. Over time, the cues that spark our habits become so common and deeply encoded that they are essentially invisible and make us feel like the urge to act comes from nowhere. That's true. I do agree with that in terms of, for example, I couldn't even tell you, but I guess when I really do think about it, it's always that level of, especially with phone, for me, at least it's, need for stimulation or like boredom or something like there is something that's causing it, right? Like it isn't just like, oh, it's random, it's coming out of nowhere.
No, absolutely. I think it is interesting as well because most of the time we don't know what our habits actually are. And because of that, when we suddenly, like, for some reason come to awareness of what we're doing, it's like, oh, where's this coming from? Because we might not know that we do this all the time, that it is a habit, right? And so it does feel like it's coming out of nowhere. I do agree with that. And it feels like an urge almost.
Yeah.
Before we can effectively build new habits, we need to know our current ones. I completely agree with that because like I just said, and he goes on to talk about this, and this is like an actionable idea that we can definitely implement, is this thing called pointing and calling.
Oh yeah.
So realistically, if you went,
I was playing along with this yesterday, like I'm on my phone. Like, when every time you pick up your phone, you just go, I'm on my phone. Imagine being like in like a subway in London. It's like, you just go, I'm on my phone. And everybody looks like, what is this loser doing? God.
Yeah. But I think for like if you're trying to implement certain habits, I think for the first week, that's pretty good, because like pretty good thing to do, because you kind of get used to in what context, what do you do? What are your actions that most of the time you don't even think about?
You've already helped me just realize another thing I need on my habit scorecard: context. I didn't even have the context. I had obviously like the classic, the name of the habit, the tags.
Yeah.
I put usual cue, but I guess I'm gonna prefer context, to be honest, to cue, because there's obviously other things. Like for me, it's like you said, maybe you're biting fingers on a film, so the context is film. And then the cue would be, or something happens. Do you kind of get me?
Well, because context, I think, is key, because it talks about, it encapsulates all those things, especially like what you were saying earlier on, when you have loads of emails and people are throwing loads of stuff at you by the end of the day. So you know that you're running low on like cognitive energy, right? Yeah. That's a cue, in a sense, that you're about to go on your phone, you're about to sit in front of the TV or something like that. Yes. And then he says, and this is what you would talk about earlier on. So you can use, so basically the pointing and calling technique is pretty straightforward. You basically point and call out what you're doing, like what your action is. So
whenever you act is like, I'm biting my nails.
Literally. Yeah. Because it just brings it above the level of awareness, right? So that you're conscious of it. So you realize why and when you're doing it. And then he says that you can apply this kind of exercise with the habits that you engage in, and then basically you can build a habit scorecard. So let's say you go through your whole day or your whole week, pointing out things that you do and what things are like habits. And then what you would talk about earlier on, Jess, when you write down all your habits that you have, and then you put like a plus, minus, or equal sign. So it's like neutral, negative, or positive. And that way you can see which ones you want to get rid of, which ones you want to improve on, or whatnot. But that way you're kind of starting at your baseline, right? As in you're trying to figure out what your normal behavior is and how you can build on top of that.
I was going to say, for anybody's listening, I like to think by in the next month we might even be able to create a Notion template for this.
Absolutely. So
keep checking our social channels, because I've already got, I feel like we should be giving away some of the stuff we're creating on this, because especially this habit scorecard stuff, because it's like you're saying, it's so useful to just have a centralized database of all the current habits you're currently doing, obviously knowing whether they're good and bad. You can start doing like a sort of proper analysis, looking where you do it, the action you usually take, the reward you usually have, what the long-term impact is on you, and what type of identity this fosters. Because I quite like that as an idea too. Like, I'm somebody who does this, this, and this. This doesn't remind me of the identity that I want to become.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a good point, because I'm going to tie that in with the habit scorecard, because let's say you're putting these plus, minus, and equals. Yeah. Well, what makes a good or bad habit? Well, there isn't really such a thing unless you kind of have a goal or an identity you're trying to achieve, right? So it's like, would this person achieve this? And then it's either a plus, minus, or an equals, right? Yeah. And that's kind of something that I took away from this, is that, it's you need to know what your point B is that you're going towards, right? What the identity, what type of ideal person you want to be, so that you can be like, this habit doesn't work, this habit does.
Yes.
And there's another actionable step here, which says, ask yourself, does this behavior help me become the type of person I wish to be? Yeah. So once kind of similar to what we talked about.
Once again, linking it back to the identity. Yeah. But once again, this requires a clear idea of the identity you kind of want to have. Yeah. But like you said, you start originally with the goals, don't you? Sorry, you start with what you want, then you create the identity around, like, who would be able to do this?
Yeah.
Like, what type of person?
So moving on.
Yes.
Okay, so the best way to start a new habit. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah. So we got the implementation intention. So it refers to how you implement a particular habit by planning beforehand when and where to act. So the two most common cues are time and location. So basically what you'd say is, I will brackets behavior. So I will do this specific habit at time, in location, or at location. And I got a quote with this, which I really quite liked. Where have I put it? Oh, yeah, that was it. Give your habits time and space to live in the world. And I thought that was quite interesting. And I've recently thought a lot about, especially time, more than anything, like having it blanketed out in your calendar to be like, at this time I'm going to be doing this. Because you know how I was saying to you about having a personal trainer in France, and obviously going to the gym more often because, you know, I booked in with him and, you know, he's motivating me to go. Well, I've actually started to realize it was more the fact that it was a time. The fact that it was literally, I knew that every day, let's just say at 10 a.m. I was going to the gym. And obviously having him motivated as well, because I can't just, you know, not turn up. There's a level of
accountability.
So there is a level of that, but I do think the biggest point is time. So for example, I've come back to the UK now. I need to sign up for a gym, and then I also now need to decide what time I'm going. And because I haven't decided yet, I don't know when I'm going to go tomorrow, because tomorrow was the first day I wanted to do it. And because I don't have a time, I don't even know. I probably won't end up going.
It's vague, right? It's like, I'll go tomorrow, but it's like,
yes, exactly. But if I said to myself, 7 a.m. tomorrow, I'm going to be in the gym, I know I'll do it, because it lives like literally that quote says, you need to give a habit time and space in the world. Like, I'm going to go to the gym at this time, and you are so much more. I think the study he was referencing when he talked about implementation intentions was literally like, there was 3 options, I believe. One was like a vague time. One was like committing.
Oh, I know the one.
Do you kind of get what I mean? And the third option was something like, obviously saying you're going to do something at a time and a space, in a space, sorry. And the amount of people who followed through with the decisions was like 38% for the other two, and this one was like 95. It was that big of a difference to have like a time and a space that you say you're going to do something.
But it makes so much sense because you're giving clarity, right? It's very kind of like getting things done in the sense that it's the next action, right? You're giving clarity and concrete detail to your plan. So it's like, if I wanted to say, do an essay, well, bloody hell, that encapsulates loads of different things. I have to do research, I have to do my intro, my main paragraphs, blah, blah. If I break it down to actual steps or specific details when I do it, you can't do a vague essay, can you? But you can write the first sentence, or like write the abstract, or write the summary, write the synopsis, write the plan. At least these things are like more doable. But that's exactly it. The thing is that you're taking something vague, you're giving it clarity, and you're essentially turning your goal, which is to go to the gym tomorrow, to do an essay, into a plan. Right, because you know when and where you're going to be doing it. And he had like a good quote in this, and it was like, many people think they lack motivation, when what they really lack is clarity. That is it.
No, but it's even the same with not even just habits. I guess it's also with, you know, procrastinating on tasks which aren't related to habits because they're like one-off tasks. But the procrastination usually comes from the fact that you don't have a clear idea of, like you just said, where to start. You have something on your to-do list, such as write an essay, and it's like, fuck me, where to start? Because that's got so many little mini micro targets within writing an essay, right? Like,
absolutely,
it's impossible to just write. Well, it isn't impossible to write just an essay, right? Because you eventually do it, but the way you do it is you break it down into subparts, and you do each part, and then you end up with an essay.
Absolutely.
It's like saying, I don't know, eating a plate of food without cutting up into bits and eating it bite by bite kind of thing. It's not like you just make your mouth go like a snake and suck it all in.
No, absolutely. And I tell you what, I really took away from this time. He had something here, and it was like, being specific about what you want and how you will achieve it helps you to say no to things that derail progress. We often say yes to a lot of things because our goals are too unclear or too vague. And I think that is just so true. Like, I say yes to so many things when I don't have things planned out. And then I realize it just derails me. And, because I'm not saying no. I'm not saying like, oh, I can't go out tonight because I need to do my essay, right?
Yes.
I don't, because to me, it's like, oh, I just need to do my essay tomorrow, when I haven't actually seen how much I've got to do or when I've got to do it or things like that. And that I thought was actually
as well. I think that's interesting. I think that the whole point of being clear is so important, right? Like this whole having an identity and stuff like that. And you're right. It probably is some of the reasons why in the past we've all struggled to like hit the habits we've wanted to do, right? Because we've been looking at habits for a long time now. And don't get me wrong, I feel like we've always been able to get some level of like stuff dialed in, if that makes sense. But you've never been perfect. But I guess that's because we've never really been clear. And it does make sense.
I think that is it.
It's a level of like, deciding who you want to be and being very clear on it. So like when something comes up and you can just be like, no, immediately be like, no, of course not. Because this is not me for now. Like I didn't find doing that dry January last year when I was doing it. I think, was it this year or last year? I can't even remember. But either way, I did not find it hard when I just decided I'm not drinking for a month.
Yeah.
Like, because I was very clear. It was like, I'm not drinking for a month. And funny enough, anytime something came up while I was drinking, I just went, I'm not drinking.
Yeah.
Whereas if I said to myself, if I did like a half-assed one,
I'm not really drinking at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not really drinking at the moment. It just never quite works the same because it's not clear.
Absolutely.
Unless you set rules like, I'm not drinking at the moment. So what that means is I don't drink unless it's this type of event.
Yeah.
Do you kind of get what I mean? At least then you've got the clarity. Because then you're like, okay, this is an event I can drink at. This is Otherwise, the maybe I can drink. Yeah. You will bend it as you will to however it fits the situation. But if you're like, I'm only ever going to drink if it's a night where it's somebody's birthday, let's just say.
Yeah.
And then you're like, bang, okay, this is a birthday. Ticks that box. I can drink.
You've given yourself the circumstances with which.
Exactly, and you've been clear.
Yeah.
Like I'm only going to have a sugary food after a workout or something like that. At least then you're like, okay, now I know. And then by then you might even have another motivation where you're like, I've just worked out, I don't want to eat sugary food. I quite like things like that because he was even giving examples, I think, where it was similar stuff to that. Like I won't buy something over the cost of £100 unless I've spent a day thinking about it or something like that.
Yeah,
I quite like things like that. Yeah. Like it's quite cool. Like give yourself time to think. It's like I never make decisions for costs of over £100 in the moment. I'm always going to take a day to think it through. But that also really helps you for like whenever you're in a situation where somebody's trying to sell you something and you're like, sorry, man, my rules are the rules. I don't decide here. So no matter how many sleazy, like urgent techniques you're going to use on me, I've already decided anything that's a big purchase, I need to think about it.
And this is why I think that we can, like, especially with the Notion aspect, but you could apply the influential principles that we were talking about in influence. Because think about it, you're making a commitment, right, to yourself already. So you're more likely to follow through with it. You're also making a public stance, or you could make a public stance, right? You could tell people, I'm not drinking this month unless I go to this charity. So all of these things, you're applying these influential principles that can build on top of those habits that add to it, add extra layers to hold you accountable in that sense.
Get it down for habit stack.
Yeah.
Because I think you could have some template based stuff for that, like posting on a newsfeed. Like I say, I'm going to do this at this time, and that's like this template you use. But
So on that, I think there's an extra deal. So this was about time and location, and then he talked about this extra thing called the Diderot effect, which basically states that we often decide what we want to do next based on what we have just finished doing. And we can utilize this same effect with habits by stacking them together. So he talks about this thing called habit stacking and how it's a special form of implementation intention where you pair a new habit with a current habit. So the formula would be like, the best way to apply this is by saying, after current habit, I will do my new desired habit. And that way, you're kind of
I quite like that,
the situation.
For example, I always have a morning coffee. It's like something like, when I have morning coffee, I meditate for 60 seconds. Or when I have morning coffee, I pick up book and read 2 pages minimum. And then I'll end up reading like 20. You kind of get what I mean? But it's that.
Absolutely.
When I pick up my morning coffee, I get down and do 10 press ups. That's slightly more effort. But the premise is you just, you use something you do normally as the new cue for the habit you want.
Yeah.
So you could even do stuff, I don't know, like whenever you wash your hands, you do something, I don't know, stuff you do regularly every day, try and find something that's related to it and it's easy to do from that position that you're in. And then, I didn't really use that enough, to be honest. I don't either. But once again, it's like going back, doing the pointing and calling, figure out what actions you do in a day. You got to take stock.
Exactly. Now
you
can figure
we're a different position now than we were, when we first read this book, right? Like as we know, life ebbs and flows. You pick up new habits, you drop them all the time. I'm always constantly like getting into mini like rabbit holes with my behaviors, if that makes sense. And I guess got to take stock of what's happening right now, and then is this conducive to where I want to be? Obviously, you got to figure out where you want to be first. But that's a really hard question in itself. But I guess everybody always has some level of knowing where they want to be, because otherwise it would never act in life. Exactly. Every time you act, you are acting in a way to do something.
No, I agree. And I think just to finish this point off is that if you're implementing a habit, the cue needs to be frequently enough so that it's building on it, right? The more you do it, the more likely you're going to embed it. Yeah. It needs to be, like we said, immediately, like it needs to be specific and immediately actionable. And then the last point is that, like, choose a point when you can actually do it, right? If you've got so many other things you're doing all at once, right? You're supposed to be having a call here and doing this and that and that. You're probably not going to have the time to actually give to do this habit. So give yourself the appropriate time when you're going to do it. That's kind of all I had for that bit. Moving on to the next bit.
Yep. Motivation is overrated. So motivation is overrated. Environment often matters more. So our environment influences our behavior and decisions, especially as we are inclined to choose the most obvious and easiest option. So the visual cues are one of the greatest catalysts of our behavior. Therefore, a small change in our environment can change how we behave. I mean, a pretty simple one that I've been thinking about, especially today, obviously knowing we're doing this podcast, is removing phone from my visual range, like 100%. I've done this before where I've even like thrown it. You probably can't see it on the camera, but there's like a bed behind me, throw it on the bed. It's away arm's reach. It's not visible to me, and I will rarely think of it because it's, what you can't see doesn't exist, so to speak.
Absolutely. Or it creates friction, right? It's like you have to go next door to get your phone. Already, I don't want to do that. We're so lazy, but we have to capitalize on that laziness to our own benefit.
But the so lazy is why we end up picking up the phone and just distracting ourselves. Exactly. Because we're so lazy to do something that's actually like takes our focus and actual attention. So we, grab something else to be like, oh, okay, scroll through that for a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, what else do you have here?
The most persistent behaviors usually have obvious or multiple cues, which makes sense. Like we were just saying, the more you do a habit, the more it gets embedded. So if there's multiple cues, so for instance, if I had a habit of drinking more water, or I need to drink more water, if I had multiple different glasses around the room, I'm probably more likely to actually drink some water. I don't know why I would do that, but yes, you see my point. There's more cues, right? There's more glasses of water. I got a quote here which says, most people live in a world others have created for them. Be the designer of your world and not merely the consumer of it, which I quite liked. It's, you can design your own environment to an extent.
Of course you can. You can choose what goes in the room you're in.
Yeah, exactly.
If it's a space that you own or you rent and it's yours, nobody else gets to choose where things are. You can do that, so you can arrange it, I guess, within the constraints of the size of your room, but you still have an opportunity to. Nobody's making you put this thing there. If that makes sense, it's like,
I mean, and this point was exactly what you were talking about just before, with applying a context to your habits. So your habits are not only associated with a single trigger, but all the context and associations linked to that cue. So thus the context becomes the trigger. So it's maybe not just be that it's the glass of water. I might be thirsty. I might have just done exercise. There's all these different states and all these other different factors that contribute to what makes us want to follow through with the habits.
Yeah.
Especially like pattern of behavior leading up to it, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say there's I guess a certain context you can think of as like specific activities you do. So for example, I find myself biting my nails more when I drive. Really random, but whenever I'm driving it, and the context is, I guess, that's where I've become my brain's began to associate biting my nails with. I guess it's a form of like being bored in the car while I'm driving, but also at the same time it's easily accessible. You've got the wheel there, you're like
no, absolutely. And then another point that I liked this the first time I read it, actually, but it was saying that our behavior is not defined by the objects in the environment, but by our relationship to them, which makes sense because realistically, how we interpret an object can change depending on our situation, right? If I'm in a fight, then a glass may be a weapon. If I'm thirsty, then it might just be a glass full of water. Right?
And also, another thing that I find specific to myself, I obviously, probably like yourself, I can imagine, I see books and I look at like a portal to knowledge, as to say. So I look around my room and I'm like, the books mean something to me, whereas I don't.
Well, just look behind you, mate.
Yeah. But I know plenty of people would like walk in and it would mean nothing to them. They'd be like, books, I don't read. I just like, whereas to me, I look at it and I'm like, wow, there's just so much, like so many ideas here, if that makes sense. Like, well, every time I come home, I actually feel more anxious because I look at all the books I've got. I'm like, fuck me, like there's so many, there's so much I haven't read. Like there's so much more to learn. And for me, that's my association and meaning I have with books in comparison to somebody else who doesn't have that, you know. And there's stuff that I'm probably indifferent to that people absolutely have, you know, massive like joys over, like the tech side of, I don't know, TV specifications. And I'm only saying this because I'm looking at trying to buy a new TV for France, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And I just know there's so much details of like the specification of the inches and the pixel content. I see some people in the comments going like, "Oh my god, look at this! It's amazing! This is," and to me, it means absolutely nothing. I'm like, is the picture going to look good or not?
Yeah.
But it's these type of things that everybody has their own relationships to specific things.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting is that because you can change how you interpret something, you can change your relationship to them.
Yeah.
Right. If you started reading up on TVs, then you can change how you'll interpret a TV. And
I'll be like, oh, that's super interesting. Now I see like the I don't know what they care, like the pixel rate or whatever. I don't know what it is, but I would see that then and be like, oh my god, that's so interesting. You know, or I'll be like, that's cool. Like I didn't know that before.
Yeah.
I guess it's also interestingly why some people, or at least myself, when I first got into sort of like health and fitness or more orientated towards it, was when I started reading more around, or started being more knowledgeable about, I guess, vitamins and stuff. If you know, from my mum who's like massive with vitamins, like if you learn more about the effects these things can have on you, you're then more inclined to be interested in using things to like make you healthier, if that makes sense. If you start reading and learning more about it, you'll start realizing, a bit like when I sent you the podcast about the booze, the effects of booze in your body. As you learn more about it, you start realizing how bad something is for you and how good something else can be for you, and then that changes your relationship with the things that you used to see in a different way. Like I now see booze in a way that's like, this is, I mean, I always saw it as like not particularly good, but it's literally poison. Like there's nothing good that it does for you. If that makes sense. But you only learn these things sometimes through like building new models of these things by learning more about them, if that makes sense.
No, just exactly. Like it gives you more content to interpret something, doesn't it?
Yeah, before we read books, we would have probably looked at a book and gone, nah, like that's what you do at school. But once you read a few, you start realizing, oh wow, these things can change your life. And then every single book becomes something that's way more interesting to you than it was before. Absolutely. Just like, you know, any of this stuff does in my head. Like you start learning about nutrition, maybe then you start realizing, oh shit, me, like what I've been eating my whole life is just wrong. Yeah. Which is probably why the people who get sort of obsessed over specific things who end up really healthy and stuff end up digging deep into nutrition and stuff, and then they start realizing, shit, I got to like optimize. It's
a self-fulfilling
it is a little bit. I think as you pay more attention to it, you kind of then realize there's, you know, better ways to do things.
No, I agree. And I think which is interesting because he has a point here, and it says it is easier to change a habit in a new environment because you do not have to fight against old cues / relationships, which makes so much sense, because if we have a relationship to everything, then they're constantly trying to get our attention in a sense, depending on how we perceive them and how we interpret them. So if we're in like I'm here, I have my laptop, I have the TV, there's an Xbox, all those kinds of things. I find it impossible to work out at home because there's so many other things I could do. See what I mean? I've got so many other relationships in this room that are trying to like get my attention in that sense. So if I'm not really feeling like I want to work out, then I've got something straight away like my PS4 that I could jump onto, but that's not ideal. So it makes sense to like, you know, it is much easier to change a habit in a new environment.
Yeah. Did you want to go for these actionable tips?
Yeah. Okay. So, so one of them is when you can't manage to get an entirely new environment, redefine or rearrange your current one, which makes sense. I'm in London. I don't have that much space that I can just suddenly acquire. So just rearranging things. And then the second one that I really like is holding a mantra, which is one space, one use. Right? Yeah. It's so much easier to sleep in your bed when you only do one thing in your bed. I do. Yeah, I only do one thing in my bed anyway. So
I hope it's sleep.
I don't sleep.
It's not sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but it's the same thing with like you go to the gym.
Yeah,
there's only one
yeah.
thing you can do when you're at the gym, right? It's like
well, there's a reason why people have office spaces in houses, rather than, for me, for example, I tend to do my work usually in like a kitchen and stuff like. But I would definitely have a better time if it was just literally a specific office space, nothing else, just like a desk, a laptop, no distractions.
Yeah.
But yeah,
and like he says here, try not to mix the context of one habit with another, as this can lead to mixing habits, and usually the easier one will win out. So once again, what we talked about earlier on is we like the easy way out. We're lazy. We will go for it if it's there. Yes. And that's kind of, I think, everything that I had for this.
Yeah. No, it's pretty comprehensive.
And then last section to this one.
The secret to self-control. So let's go for it. So the bad habits are autocatalytic. I believe that's what that says, meaning they create a self-reinforcing cycle. So you feel bad, so you eat junk food. Because you eat junk food, you then feel bad. The people with the best self-control are typically those who use it the least. It's easier to practice self-restraint when you don't have to use it very often. So self-control is a short-term strategy, not long-term. I think this is, I'm just trying to link this into like, you don't even really need to use self-control really when it's like an identity shift. Like when you are like a vegan, there is no real need for self-control because there's nothing to control because that's who you are, if that kind of makes any sense.
Absolutely.
It's obviously it's quite hard to get to that point, but I guess that's kind of his point here. It's like over time, eventually you don't need to use self-control.
But I think also because you're not trying to get something, you're trying to maintain something when it is part of your identity. So it's not like you're going out of the boundaries in a sense, right? And then needing self-control because you're just acting as you are. So I feel like, like I've never smoked. So, and I don't consider myself a smoker. So when someone offers me a cigarette, it's very easy.
It's easy. Just like, there's no, One type of means simply resisting. Once a habit has been encoded, you're unlikely to forget it, meaning the urge will still be present whenever the environmental cue appears. And then this is actionable, right?
Yes. This
means that simply resisting temptation is an ineffective strategy to eliminate a bad habit. Instead, one of the best ways is to reduce exposure to the cue that triggers it. Yeah. So that's like the inverse of the first law, isn't it? Making the cue invisible. So it's the equivalent of, if you know something that triggers a specific habit, removing it from view. If you know that you end up eating the sugary snacks you have, hide them at the bottom of your cupboard so you don't see them. Remove your phone from the room so you don't see it. Don't see the notifications thing off, all that sort of thing.
That's everything I had for that one, actually.
Cool. Lovely. I think that could be it for today, I think.
Yeah.
Only because I know I'm running out of time, so
that's fine. Yeah, let's
so
continue.
We'll do the final 3 laws the next time.
Sounds good. Cool. All right. Well, that's a wrap. Hey guys, well there you have it. We hope you enjoyed that book summary. Now we know it can be a lot to take in all at once, so if you want to be able to read this in a more palatable size, or you want to be able to implement any of those key actionable ideas that we were talking about in this episode, head on over to our website at wisewords.blog, where the book summary will be waiting for you. Also, don't forget to check out our socials as we consistently upload the key ideas, benefits, and actionable ideas from all the books that we read. The links to those will be in the description below. Now, we want to be able to get you the best content in a way that's really easy to understand, but we need your help. Your opinion matters. So you are our feedback mechanism. And with those quick actions, whether that's leaving us a like or a dislike, commenting in the comment section below, or subscribing to our channel, all of those help us gauge what we're doing well and how to improve on our method of delivery. So if you have any thoughts on the matter, don't hesitate to act. It takes less than 10 seconds and it really helps us out. But with all that being said, until next time,